Welcome back to a new episode of the Emerging Market Retail Podcast. My name is Camilo Mora.
My name is Rafael Escamilla.
And my name is Simone Balbas.
Very good, guys. And today we're going to talk about a very relevant topic for the developing world. So, Rafa, perhaps you can give us some figures and describe what we're talking about today.
Of course, yes. So today we will be talking about the 6 million refugees that we have across the world. And specifically, we will be talking about in-kind assistance versus cash assistance, which is a strategic decision that humanitarian organizations face. To provide some context, today, the vast majority of assistance that is provided by these organizations is given in-kind. So this accounts for 94% of the $25 billion of humanitarian assistance that is given worldwide, with the remaining 6% being given through cash assistance. However, there has been a very substantial and important trend with the growth of, threefold in recent years, in the last 4 or 5 years, with regards to the use of cash assistance instead of in-kind assistance. And today we have a very cool episode to discuss this. So, Simone, perhaps you can say a few words about our guest.
Yeah, so today we have a very special guest, Professor Telesila Kotsi. She is from Greece and she did field research there in 3 different refugee camps. She conducted 30 interviews, she did observations among humanitarian organizations. She consulted different documents, so she has very much to say based on her practical knowledge. And on top of that, she also did modeling work. So I think I'm really looking forward to this episode. And let's continue.
All right. So welcome back to another episode of the Emerging Market Retail Podcast. Today we have a great expert with us. This is Professor Telesila Kotsi from, she's an assistant professor of operations management at the Fisher College of Business at the Ohio State University. So Telesila received her PhD from the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University after spending some time working as a research assistant at the INSEAD Humanitarian Research Group. Telesila combines both field research, really cool field research, with rigorous analytical methods to study, broadly speaking, challenges faced by nonprofit organizations. And today we'll be discussing about retailing in the context of refugee camps. So let's just dive right in. The first question that we wanted to ask Telesila is how you became interested in this really cool topic. We know that this, coming from Greece, this also, the context of your paper has perhaps some personal connections to, topics from your home country. And we know that you also spent time on the field observing the operations and trying to understand what were some of the challenges to inform your modeling choices in the paper, which I think is really, really cool and something that we all should be doing more. So perhaps you can tell us, what were the most insightful aspects from these experiences and how did this all contribute to developing your paper?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Rafael, for the kind introduction. It's my pleasure to be talking about my research today. So to give you a little bit of context, since the paper is really studying an issue that happened back in 2016, 2017, if we think about what were the news headlines back then, about more than 1 million refugees arrived in Greece between 2015 and March 2016. And this is when really the Syrian crisis provoked a mass movement of people to Europe. And moreover, this type of movement has followed by hundreds of thousands since then. So it hasn't just stopped. It just the sheer volume of it was just so much back in 2016. So because the situation in the Greek islands was becoming really hard to manage for the Greek government, they decided to move some of these groups to the mainland. And this is really when I started listening from family members, from friends, how they were getting involved into trying to help these people resettle, provide them with different types of assistance. So This is a huge operation, and researchers in OM, we are really equipped with the right tools and skills to help the organizations provide help in a way that can benefit all the stakeholders in this ecosystem. And I will explain a little bit why understanding who are the stakeholders is important. So actually, that was the first part from my field research. That it was really cool. It was trying to understand who is really affected and how. So, for example, until that point, there was, of course, a lot of discussion about the impact of help, the impact of assistance to the refugees themselves, but also to the humanitarian organizations, since they were the actors who were making the decisions. And there was also some discussion about how the host communities in different countries were accepting the relocation of the refugees into their space. But something that was really missing was in certain types of markets, how the local retailers were going to be affected, or was there anything we could do to make the kind of impact on the retailers to be able to, all the benefits to be able to transfer to the refugees and to the host communities. So first of all, my field research helped me understand who were the stakeholders. So it brought in the focus the local retailers in my context. Also, understanding that these were not entry points, because as I explained to you, the refugees were moved after a government's decision. So the size of the population was kind of predetermined by the government. Moreover, the supply was not a constraint, because we're talking about Greece, so a relatively well-developed market, in certain places competitive as well. But in the locations where the refugees were decided to be moved, actually it was the local retailers who were holding market power. So in each of these communities, basically there was a single retailer where both the Greeks and the newly resettled refugees were able to buy products. So I think these 3 or 4 points were the main ones that my field research was able to contribute in my modeling choices and be included in the paper.
Thank you. And like, we're very interested also to learn a bit more, like, how do those humanitarian organizations, how do they decide on what help is needed by the refugees, and how do they decide what kind of products they need to supply? Can you explain a bit more on this?
Right. Thank you, Simona. That's a great question. And we really have to think about the different timing decisions that these organizations take, which is, for example, for my paper, I focused exactly at the timing where the refugees have already moved to a new place. And now the organization has to make the decision, this certain group of people, how are they going to be helped in the best possible way? So taking it a step back, if we think about the moment that the refugees are just entering a country, there is, urgency to fulfill all their basic needs. And all the expertise of these humanitarian organizations over the last 100 years has been how to provide them with in-kind assistance. And in-kind assistance is food, hygiene, shelter, so any type of, soap, shampoos, blankets, any type of the basic necessities we all need to survive. But as the organizations transition these people to stay longer in a country, now they have to figure out how can they let them make their own choices, because for a person, for an individual, is very detrimental to their psychology to feel like they are being helped on a constant basis. So some of the refugees that I interviewed, they shared with me how bad it felt to be queuing lines over and over during a single day. And basically, the humanitarian organizations wanted to, and want, in most situations, to get away from this type of model. And so the cash assistance has a benefit because it helps the individuals, so the refugees, in making their own choices. But also, it is considered an effective type of assistance because it benefits the local economies, because this money at the end they're going to be spent in the local market, so they have also an advantage of telling the host communities, having a more positive view of this new group of people that are relocated in their space. And that's why humanitarian organizations want to provide more cash assistance. But lately, I think back in 2020, 2021, there was about 20% of the total assistance provided as money, and the rest 80% was in kind. And this is a huge increase from like 5 years ago, where only a third of it, basically, so about 5% or 7% was provided as cash. So there has been a huge boost, and that's because the humanitarian organizations realize the need for cash assistance, and also the donors promote it because they feel it's a more transparent, maybe a more dignified way to help individuals.
Yeah, I think it's very beneficial, of course, to provide cash, given all the arguments that you just provided. But in your paper, you also described that it comes with a lot of challenges, and that there's an obvious trade-off for providing this cash instead of the in-kind goods. What exactly are those challenges that the help humanitarian organizations face in providing cash assistance?
Right, correct. So let's think about it. If a humanitarian organization provides cash assistance, but basically does not really understand the market conditions. So in my context, we had a monopolistic retailer who could increase the prices because they would see an increase in their demand the moment that the refugees were settled in their location. And so in this case, the retailer will increase the prices. Price inflation will impact not just the refugees, but also the host community. And so basically the humanitarian organization, by providing cash assistance, will harm both the local residents and the refugees. And so prices rise for everyone, and refugees at the end receive fewer goods because they have less purchasing power with the same amount of cash that they are provided. So an important problem that the humanitarian organizations face is to provide cash assistance to their beneficiaries in such an environment where local market power exists, and be able to benefit not just the refugees, but also the host community. The host community includes both the retailer and the residents. So in all previous literature, specifically in economics, researchers have studied the conditions under which in competitive markets, providing cash can actually be beneficial. But here, because of my field research, we looked at an environment where the retailer holds market power. And so that's the contribution of our research.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Telesila, are you suggesting that these humanitarian organizations should provide assistance in two stages? First, like in kind for a certain period of time, and then for the long-term stays in the refugee camps, then to provide cash? This is what you're saying?
So this is not the two different times. It's not really part of my paper. I only focus on the later part. But what I observed on the field, on the ground, the problem there was, first of all, they had to verify who had arrived. They had to figure out how to feed them as fast as possible. So they weren't able to set up the cash assistance in a way that they could track it and be transparent to their donors. And so they had other issues which hinder them from providing cash assistance.
Okay.
And in most urgent phase of this type of situations, I have always seen in-kind assistance being provided.
Okay, very good. So in your paper, you propose this two cash assistance policies, right? So on one hand, we have the price index cap, and the other one's like the price dependent cash assistance policy, right? So perhaps you can explain a little bit how those like two cash assistance policies work, and how they ensure that all the involved parties, all the stakeholders that you studied, are better off when in-kind assistance is provided.
Sure, yeah. So let's first focus on the humanitarian organization's problem. So the humanitarian organization wants to maximize the utility for the refugees. And they have these two types of assistance they can provide. They just have to decide on the right mix of in-kind and cash assistance. So the issue is that while they're making this decision, they're also affecting the retailer's pricing decision, right, in this environment, which in turn now affects the refugees' utility. So if the humanitarian organization provides only in-kind assistance and no cash, then the refugees have no flexibility in purchasing whatever goods they satisfy their own preferences. On the other hand, if we allocate some of the budget on cash assistance, it benefits immediately the retailer, even if the price remains unchanged. However, as I explained before, the retailer might increase the price, which impacts both the refugees and the local residents. So having this as a base, now let me try to explain how the two different price policies can provide a win-win situation for all the stakeholders involved. So I will focus more on the price-dependent cash assistance, because the price cap, index cap works. The mechanics are a little bit different, but the result is the same. And because the price index cap is about price regulation, I think the other one, the price-dependent cash assistance, is one that is more basically easier to apply in the environments that I studied. So under both these types of policies, let's focus on the cash assistance, price-dependent cash assistance. What happens is that the amount of cash assistance depends on the retail price index. So we build a retail price index based on a set of essential goods that the refugees have. And this is where the knowledge of the humanitarian organization is very important. So if the retail price index is too high, then the humanitarian organization, in a partnership with the government, will offer less cash assistance to the refugees. And this is what will eventually curb the retailer's market power. So in a way, the amount of the cash assistance can act as a lever to set the desirable prices from the retailer. So we do not oblige the retailer to follow a specific price policy, but we basically incentivize them through the amount of the cash assistance that we offer to the refugees. And to explain a little bit how, in terms of implementation, this could work, the idea is that the humanitarian organization, before even the refugees move to a certain location, will announce such a policy and will consult with the retailer. And the retailer is the one who can freely choose whatever prices will be provided for these goods to the refugees. But once now the chosen prices are verified by the humanitarian organization, then the humanitarian organization will decide on the amount of the cash assistance to the refugees, and will have also the help of the government to verify that the retailer will stick to the original commitment for the prices, while also the humanitarian organization sticks to the price index menu that they have originally offered to the retailer for the refugees. So in a sense, having the government participate together with the humanitarian organization, the role of the government is really to monitor and make sure that both parties, the retailer and the humanitarian organization, follow their commitments.
Okay, but wait, so just monitor or also enforce? Because there are like those are two different things, you know. So what's your take on this? What would you suggest?
Yeah, so no, there is no enforcement in the price-dependent cash assistance. Is really so the enforcement would be that, in the sense that, for example, if any of the commitments is not followed, then there will be some measures taken. but there is no enforcement in the sense of a price cap where you have to, fix a price level and basically control, regulate the market.
Mhm.
So it's a different type of, it's a more, say, a more indirect enforcement. And it's easier to understand because we can basically leave the market operate on its own, but just because of the price menu, we can align the incentives of all these different actors.
Yeah, I think this idea is very interesting. And I'm wondering, like, you've spoken to so many practitioners on your field trips, and are they actually also planning to implement this idea? And if they are doing so, how are they going to do this?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's really a work in progress. So what really happens in this type of environments is that policies change, governments change, and even the turnover, the staff turnover in some of these humanitarian organizations is so high that the people that I interviewed, they don't work anymore in the same positions. And that happened even during the time I was doing my research, let alone now. So the discussion, at least in Greece, sorry for that. The discussion really in Greece has moved beyond the cash assistance implementation question, and this is because of how the donors basically incentivize the cash assistance. So what happened was that the donors were giving a certain amount of money to the humanitarian organizations who could then allocate them to cash and in-kind assistance. But after, I think, a period of 2 years, most of these donors kind of phased out their programs because the crisis basically was somehow resolved. So, and the truth is that some of these refugees did finally resettle to other countries, so they didn't stay in Greece. So the implementation part, I think now that we have the mechanism, is something that I discuss with organizations to maybe implement in a different occasion and not in the Greek environment.
Yeah, I mean, I can also imagine that this would be a huge undertaking, and it's really complex. I was thinking, for instance, of how the feedback would reach the retailers themselves and how they would become aware of this such that they can implement it into their routine. So I think just thinking of the implementation, this would require a lot of effort and a lot of explaining and patiently walking everyone through how this is going to work. And it's a different paper, right? It's a different
Yes.
project altogether. But
yeah, that's definitely true. That implementation is comes with its own challenges, and the truth is that the humanitarian organizations were involving the retailers on some aspect during this whole operation. So they were informing them of because they wanted to make sure that the retailers, together with the rest of the host community, was positive towards the refugees being relocated to their place. And to do so, they informed the retailers of how many people would be moved in their location, what type of preference they have in terms of food, especially. This is a really big question. And so they kind of helped them prepare for the increase in demand. And that's why I think that implementing the price-dependent cash assistance on top of what they were doing already wouldn't be that difficult operationally speaking. It will be just an added layer of what type of communication they should have with the retailer. It would be more structured.
Okay.
Right, because they would have to come up with a price index in advance and be able to communicate that in the right way to the retailer. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, and I mean, I want to continue on this line and really talking about your engagement with the practitioners, because I think that is one of the really cool aspects of the paper. And I mean, you talked about some important features of the context that you're investigating. Which are the fact that this is not an entry point, right? So the challenges there are drastically different, and you've already talked a little bit about that. and then the second one is, the fact that this is a monopolistic retailer, right? And that really shapes up the dynamics in the market. So I mean, we've been thinking about this, and we wanted to get your opinion on how this reality would shift in those if those two assumptions were different, right? Or if those two elements were somehow different. So again, we're talking about the entry points and the retailers holding a monopolistic position. Maybe this also relates to the literature that you've already alluded to, which has already spoken to that. But I was wondering whether you could say a few words about that.
Yeah, sure. So yes, about the let's take first the assumption of the retailers' monopoly power. So this one, the way it has been studied already is in a competitive market setting. For example, I think the paper that comes to my mind was about Jordan and about Lebanon. What happened in that case was the market was basically able to push the prices down because of the competitive nature between different retailers. And so we didn't see a price inflation, or if there was a price inflation, it was only temporary and then it kind of phased out. So there wasn't such an issue about the price inflation. The problem there was how can you ensure supply, and basically how can you trigger out if the effect was coming out of a supply constraint or because of the demand increase. And really, there hasn't been an answer in that when both features are included in a model. So the cool aspect with our paper was that we focused on a setting with no supply constraint, and we were able to show that when there is a demand increase, we can see these different dynamics in the market. Now, talking about the feature of the entry points, so in the Greek islands, for example, some of the humanitarian organizations that I interviewed were also involved in the kind of initial step of helping the refugees. And really there, the problem was demand uncertainty. So every day they will get varying, numbers of people entering the borders, and the problem was really, even if they were prepared with some kind of in-kind assistance, what could they do in the case that they were running out of it? Because in the islands still, even if the market, I would say, is a little bit more competitive than in the places that I visited, still, I don't think they can handle basically a 200% increase of demand in one day. So the organizations were not basically able to fulfill that excess of demand, and what they did was to rely on the army and basically the government, Greek governmental agencies to fulfill the needs. But this is really not a long-term solution. So both these assumptions are critical for the game theory model that I built, and changing any of them would really, change how the incentives can be aligned.
Super, super interesting. And I mean, you've already talked a little bit about it, but I was wondering whether you could tell us, whether this discussion is also ongoing in other places around the world. So I know you also, given the fact that you spent time at INSEAD, which is of course, a great place to be if you want to learn about humanitarian operations, and your engagement with other humanitarian organizations in different settings. I was wondering whether you could say a few words about the challenges that they're facing. What are some of the exciting conversations that are taking place around refugee camps? And what can we expect to be coming in the future?
Yes, there has been an increase in cash assistance. So I have heard from all kind of humanitarian organizations explaining how this is not gonna, go. They will not go back to in-kind assistance. at least without examining whether they could provide cash assistance mixed together with in-kind. In terms of interesting initiatives, I have shared, at least with I have a recent collaboration with the World Food Programme, and I know that in some of the big refugee camps that they have around Africa, they are allowing the refugees basically to become the retailer. So inside the refugee community, now it is the refugees who need to procure goods from the local markets, and they are the ones who decide the prices. And so this is really exciting for them because it also allows the refugees to learn new skills, to be able to take even more power over their own lives and become more dignified. And a second initiative that it didn't happen in Greece. I haven't heard about it anywhere in Europe, but I know that it exists in other contexts, is about cash for work. So it's basically conditioning the cash assistance on refugees based on but how much they have worked, for example, during a month as a period. So they could do different types of work inside the refugee camps, or if the country and the regulations allow it, they could also work outside in the host community. And then basically the humanitarian organization provides them with a cash payment, which reflects the type of work that they have done. So these are the two most recent ones that I have heard about. But really, in the environment where cash is unconditional, from my conversations with humanitarian organizations, it's always it's always in their interest to be able to provide a win-win solution. So, for example, they want the refugees to gain the power of meeting their individual needs. They want also the retailers to be able and sell more products and at least be able to get as much profit as they would if they could increase the prices. But also make sure that the local residents are not harmed by, higher prices. So for the humanitarian organizations, it's really important to keep a balance. And even with the two other initiatives that I mentioned, they strive to be able to have such a balance.
Very good. Telesila, thank you for joining us today in this episode, a truly insightful conversation. And well, guys, if you enjoyed what you heard, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and leave us a review. We will love hearing from you. And also be sure to follow us on social media to stay updated on our latest episodes. Thank you so much for your time, Telesila.
Perfect. Thank you, Camilo. Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, Simone.
This podcast is brought to you by Tilburg University.